Howdy travelers, and welcome to the Deep Space Travel Break. This is a new series sponsored by the Deep Space Travel Network and hosted by me, Kanaju, to talk about, all things No Man's Sky, not just the latest happenings, but speculation, community creations, and stuff like that. So when I say brought to you by the Deep Space Travel Network, what is that? Well, it's an in-game organization run by me and my friends, and it's not quite a civ. It's more of a service or a company, if you like. It's more of a resource for locations you can visit, media, just something to sort of expand the No Man's Sky experience and offer some basic role-playing opportunities for people who aren't really interested in joining a civ, with all of the rules and sort of laws that they have. So it's really more freeform. If you're interested in finding out more, you can visit deepspacetravelnetwork.com. That's deep-space-travel-network.com. Kind of a long one. You can also Google Deep Space Travel Network. That's probably a bit easier. But without further ado, let's get on to the show. So, normally, this would be the No Man's Sky news section, but there isn't much news to speak of. Official news, anyways. We're gearing up for the 5-year anniversary next week on August 9th, 2021. That'll be 5 years since the PS4 release of No Man's Sky here in North America. So, I figured the topic of this week's show would be, looking back a little bit. I am hoping to make a video sort of reviewing and ranking every titled update of the last 5 years. So I won't go into too much detail on this podcast, but I will give some quick thoughts. No Man's Sky originally released August 9th, 2016. It was one of my most anticipated games. I was so excited. I had forgotten to pre-order, funny enough. So I went to GameStop to pick up a copy for me and my girlfriend at the time. And they were sold out, actually. I had to go to another store, and they still had 2 copies left. So I was able to get those. And I went back to my girlfriend's house, and she had, a TV upstairs and a TV downstairs. So I set up my PS4 upstairs, and this was after work, and she set up hers downstairs, and we both started at the same time, and it was remarkable. She started on this beautiful, lush planet with, rainbow grass and all kinds of trees, and I started on the desert planet. And at first, it seemed like she had gotten the better end of the deal, but it turns out my planet was covered in these huge gold deposits, which back in the day, as a day one player, finding a lot of gold and stuff like that seemed pretty significant. Nowadays, gold's not a very lucrative, source of income, but at that time, options were more limited, and it was the only planet I'd ever seen, so I just assumed gold was quite valuable. And yeah, I remember loving it. We kept running up and down the stairs to see, what each other's planets were looking like as we moved forward, and we had a good time. We weren't really aware of the sort of controversy that was brewing, because we were enjoying ourselves. And, to this day, I maintain that No Man's Sky, I wouldn't give it a perfect grade at launch. It wasn't like a 10 out of 10. All my dreams come true, but it wasn't as bad as people said either. I think a lot of the poor reviews were from bad RNG or simply people having the wrong expectations. A lot of people went in expecting multiplayer, expecting, Halo in space, expecting this grand space opera. But if you watch any of the trailers, you're either walking around in those trailers or shooting stuff in space. And those 2 things you can in fact do in the game. So I felt like I'd gotten what I had paid for, but I understand where a lot of other people had sort of, heard things Sean had mentioned in interviews, sometimes years prior. I still remember people were expecting ringed planets at launch, and I had gone through interviews, and I had found an interview back in like 2013 or something after the initial reveal trailer, where Sean was talking about, ringed planets, and that's the only evidence I could find of that. And you might say, well, that's good enough, but in the same interview, he was asked if they were going to do a physical release, and he said he didn't know yet, because at the time, I mean, they were a small indie development studio. They only had 4 people working on the game. So I think the expectations people had of what it was going to be were a little disproportionate to, the actual team working on it. But, I mean, I could probably make a whole video on that. We don't need to retread, that ground. I enjoyed it, pretty well. Played it for a few weeks. I wasn't disappointed, but I did put it down to play some other games, right? And, reading all the controversies and stuff, I did eventually go back and watch the other trailers, and I was like, oh, it would be cool if they had this or that. But I wasn't too sad. However, then I believe it was November rolled around, 2016, and we had the Foundation update. And that, I think, is what really ignited my love of No Man's Sky. I took it from a game I enjoyed to a game I became obsessed with. So when Foundations came out, it added freighters, it added base building. Obviously, you could customize the base in your freighter. You could hire NPCs. It added all kinds of new features. It regenerated the entire universe, and it really showed that they weren't finished developing the game. Not that the game wasn't finished at launch, but that they still had more they wanted to do. And at that time, I wasn't as familiar with, back in those days, patches never seemed as significant, right, for a console release, where they would literally regenerate every level of the game and add entirely new gameplay features and loot. And I was enthralled. And I continue to be with each subsequent update. Atlas Rises was incredibly significant to me. I think that's what really solidified No Man's Sky as like one of my core forever games that I would always enjoy. The mystery of it, the way they upgraded all of the graphics. They added tons of story, a new alien race, new ship types, new biomes, new structures. It was incredible, and a lot of publications you'll read sort of say that in 2018, with the release of Next, that's when No Man's Sky sort of fulfilled its promises. That's when it lived up to what it said it would be. But I would say most of them missed out on 2017's Atlas Rises, because I would say Atlas Rises fulfilled the original vision. It had a grand story. It added basic multiplayer, which is all we could have expected at launch. It added the portals so that you could go between worlds. It added missions. It added all sorts of content that maybe some people would have expected at launch. But for my money, I would say Atlas Rises is when it really hit that, promises fulfilled mark. By the time Next rolled around in 2018, I think that's when the general public, decreed it had made up for launch in their eyes. But for me, that was all gravy. And the gravy train continued with The Abyss and Visions, which I consider 2 absolutely excellent updates. I mean, they essentially just added content, which is all people want, The Abyss was wonderful. I remember the day it came out, my friend and I played about 5 hours straight, just exploring oceans, seeing how deep we could go, getting lost in caves with our submarines. It was a lot of fun. Similarly with Visions, that added color back into the universe. So with Next, there'd been a limited color palette, and with Visions, suddenly, water could be many different colors, grass and biomes could be many colors, He also added a bunch of new biomes, such as this one you see behind us, um, which I absolutely loved. These new exotic biomes, including collectibles you could only find in these biomes. It added archaeology, a new enemy type. It was an excellent update. A lot of people I've seen kind of place it on the lower end of their like update tiers, but I personally don't understand that. It just added lots of content, and it made the Crash Freighters procedural, which I mean was a huge deal to me back in the day. After that, we get the hype train leading up to Beyond in 2019. Now, the problem with Beyond is that unlike the other updates, which just sort of appeared and we enjoyed them because it was like a surprise gift, Beyond they did a lot of lead up to, right? They announced it in, I believe, January that year. Don't quote me, maybe February. But they put out a small teaser saying, you know, coming, you know, this year. And it got people really excited, right? Because we're thinking, oh, how soon is this coming? But it turned out to be, you know, a summer update, which we had to wait over 6 months for. Which isn't, I mean, it's not the end of the world, but what that does when you advertise that is it builds up a lot of hype. And so they say, you know, there are going to be 3 pillars to this update. The first was, you know, multiplayer, the Nexus, which a lot of people weren't excited for. I thought it'd be pretty cool, but it wasn't like one of my requested features. The second pillar was going to be No Man's Sky VR, which was really exciting. It was actually exciting enough that I went out and bought a PSVR, which was totally worth it, by the way. I love playing No Man's Sky in VR. And then the third pillar was going to be a surprise. You know, ooh, what could it be? You know, would it be combat? Would it be cities? Would it be... People had a lot of, frankly, unrealistic expectations. Not combat, but, you know, cities and stuff like that. Anyways, what turned out being the third pillar was something called No Man's Sky 2.0, which is a really exciting title, but in my opinion, it didn't really live up to it, especially the way it was pitched. You know, they said the idea was that throughout all the updates the past 2 years, you know, they'd been added one at a time and they hadn't really been integrated together. So Beyond was supposed to sort of integrate all of the updates into one so that it would be more of a cohesive package, right? And to some extent, they did accomplish that, but for my money, it really broke the game in a lot of ways. It was barely playable. Multiplayer was barely playable. I had constant crashes. A lot of stuff just didn't work. And it remained that way mostly until Synthesis came out later that year. So for me, 2019 was a pretty disappointing year. I mean, VR was a lot of fun, but it was still broken at a lot of points. The Nexus was really great, but it lagged like hell and often crashed, or you'd get stuck in your ship, or all kinds of kooky things would happen. And again, multiplayer was quite broken for many months. And then Synthesis came out, and funny enough, Synthesis, the name and the way they described it, sort of sounded like Beyond again. You know, the idea was to meld all these different parts together. But I feel like they genuinely succeeded with Synthesis. It added, you know, a bunch of small quality of life features that I really enjoyed. And for me, it made the game as good as it was, you know, during the Visions era. It was stable, it was beautiful, it had now a ton of features, and I was really happy with how it was looking. So that was 2019, you know, just a couple of main updates. But 2020 was really something else. It started early with the Living Ship update. And that was really exciting because not only did it add a new ship class, which we hadn't had since Atlas Rises, but it added a a whole bunch of points of interest in space, right? It was almost like a space update in a sense, because it added all kinds of new interactions, random events, new storyline, new tech, all kinds of new systems specifically tailored for spaceplay. And considering, a lot of people consider No Man's Sky like not a space sim, but it's one of a few, high-profile space games. There wasn't much to do in space prior to this update. So this was a huge improvement. I really loved it, and I was excited for what would come next. And we didn't have to wait long. About a month or so later, we got the Exomech update, which by comparison was pretty disappointing. I often consider this my least favorite update, simply because the mechs look really cool, but they are a pain in the ass to control. They barely turn. You would think it would be as simple as, walking around, but in reality they turn like really slowly, and they have to have like a wide girth like this, so they're kind of a pain in the ass. They're not that strong, so if you're fighting a sentinel walker, you're almost better just pulling out your gun and fighting it on foot rather than getting in your mech, even with upgraded cannons. So it didn't add much in that case. It did add some improvements to Exocraft, which is really great. It added an Exocraft summoning station from your freighter. So now, instead of having to build a base or an exo bay, you could simply build this little room in your freighter, and anytime you warp your freighter to a new system, you can call any of your Exocraft, which was really great. They added further Exocraft customization, and I believe this is when they added first-person Exocraft views for 2D players. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it was a few small improvements here and there. A few other quality of life stuff. I mean, obviously it wasn't a bad update. It didn't break the game. It didn't take anything away. Well, it did take away hazard protection in Exocraft. You'd have to install that. But other than that, I mean, it was fine. It didn't live up to its potential of adding a mech to the game, After that came the crossplay patch. I guess it's a titled update, but it didn't feel like one. It didn't have like the big patch notes with the book cover, but it was a small update. It added crossplay, which was really cool, as well as little improvements like in VR now you could see your entire body instead of just floating hands, which was really great, and a few other quality of life settings. So that was pretty good. We also, after that though, followed one of my favorite updates of all time, which was Desolation. Desolation added procedural derelict freighters to explore. And one of my requests leading up to this, I'd posted it many times on Twitter, not a request, but speculation or, wishes, was adding some kind of procedural dungeons to the game, right? Because you could go across all these different planets, you could, go to space, do all these things, but there weren't any dungeons in the game, as strange as that sounds. You couldn't go to a ruin and solve puzzles and sort of, get a reward. You couldn't board ships and fight a boss at the end. You couldn't, take on a sentinel compound or anything like that. It was very limited what you could do combat-wise. So this was a much-needed update to combat as well. They sort of rebalanced things, changed how some of the guns function, and actually added 3 new enemy types with this. They added security drones, security turrets, I guess 4. They added those jellyfish things, and these swarms, these infestations on the derelict freighter. So I was really impressed with this update. I was impressed with just the amount of variation available on these derelict freighters. Each one I visited was pretty different. You know, they had procedural lore, they had procedural puzzles, simple ones, but different amounts of enemies, different arrangements of stuff. It was even different, lengths. It was very impressive. And they created a whole bunch of bespoke content for it. I thought they would just reuse what they had. But it was very impressive. It showed almost like a next generation of proc gen, a kind of proc gen they had never used in No Man's Sky. And it really got me excited for what was possible, what else they could add. It also added the scrap dealer, which I really appreciate, to the space station. So that was like a 10 out of 10 update for me. And then they followed it up just a month or a month and a half later with Origins, No Man's Sky 3.0, which was another 10 out of 10 update. It added almost everything people have been asking for. It added larger planetary structures. It added new planets with crazier terrain. It regenerated all the biomes, added more biodiversity, more diversity of flora and fauna. It added, volcanoes. It added lightning. It added tornadoes. It added meteor showers. All kinds of new threats. It was a beautiful update. Oh, and of course, it added like the white whale of No Man's Sky. It added giant sandworms. Among other things, it added creatures that can now fly but also land and walk around. It added all kinds of things. And to this day, every time I play No Man's Sky, I'm still discovering, a new combination, something I haven't come across before. So it really is the update that keeps on giving. And I don't know if I would say it's my favorite update. That might still be Atlas Rises, but it definitely added the most to the game, and I really love it. So that was great, but they didn't stop there. They ended up adding one more update in technically two. They added a Halloween update, which was just like a big patch, essentially, where they tweaked combat a little bit more, made it a little bit more difficult in the derelict freighters, and added some, spooky stuff you could get from the scrap dealer. But then following that, they had the next generation update, which launched alongside the PS5 and Xbox Series consoles. And this just, it added not so much new features, but improved the quality of everything. And that's currently what I'm playing here. I'm on a PlayStation 5, and I've got smooth frame rates. I have 4K, higher detail, draw distances. It's a phenomenal patch. Oh, here's the sunrise. And that's another thing Origins added was 2 and 3 star systems. So this is a binary star system. As you can see, you have both a blue and a red sunrise on the horizon. It's just beautiful. But anyway, that brings us to 2021, which has also been a really great year. Whereas 2020 added a lot of content through Living Ship, Desolation, and Origins, 2021 has been more features. So like the Companions update at the beginning of the year added the ability to tame creatures and breed creatures. But it didn't necessarily add like new creatures to the game. Additionally, we also had the Expeditions update, which when I saw it, I was pretty disappointed, but when I played it, I was blown away. Expeditions are essentially these timed events where you start a new profile and you go on like a predefined mission, earning mission patches and milestones, and it feels more like a traditional video game. You know, you get rewards and your player gets upgrades as you progress. And I absolutely loved it. You get permanent rewards that you can unlock on your other profiles. So like this backpack was unlocked through expeditions. And so far there have been 2 of them. Actually, I can show you if we go up here, the main hall. It launched with the Pioneers update, which lasted about a month, I believe. It was a ton of fun. A little bit too grindy, in my opinion, though. And then they went the opposite direction with the Beachhead expedition, which only lasted 2 weeks. But that one, I completed in like 5 hours or so, but you could do it. I think I saw some videos said you could do it in like 90 minutes. It was a real short expedition, ending with No Man's Sky's first crossover event. The Normandy from Mass Effect was a frigate you could actually add to your fleet, which I have. And right now we're waiting for Expedition 3, which, before I get to that speculation, the last update we got was Prisms, which added a whole bunch of visual upgrades as well as regenerating cave biomes and stuff like that. Gorgeous update. I would say Prisms is my favorite version of the game, period. It takes all the improvements and then really just adds the visual flares and touches that you would want. Yeah, and that brings us up to today, the week before August 9th, where we are looking forward to, the No Man's Sky 5-year anniversary update. So, what do I think they're going to add next week? Well, initially, we were expecting a new expedition, Expedition 3, to launch in July and lead up to the update in August. However, I now believe, since that didn't happen, we'll probably get an Expedition 3 next week as like an anniversary celebration in lieu of an update. And at the end of that, that's when it'll lead into the actual big summer update that everyone's looking forward to. That's what I hope will happen anyways. I mean, ideally, I'd like the update next week, but I don't think that's going to happen. Of course, I don't have any information to go on for that. It's all speculation on my part. I've read rumors and heard a thing here or there, but nothing solid that I can really point to that influence that. So that's what I'm expecting, or at least hoping for. It's always my advice for every update cycle is always, keep your expectations low, very, very low. 9 times out of 10, the update's very impressive, but sometimes you get an exomech, you know what I mean? And you can't be disappointed if your expectations are already 0. So my advice would just be keep your expectations in check. Anything we get is free. Chances are it's going to improve the game, and even if it's something you weren't asking for, in my experience, even the stuff I wasn't asking for has been a lot of fun to experience. So I trust the team at Hello Games. I trust their vision. They're adding the stuff they want to add. They're adding stuff people are asking for. So regardless, it'll be a good time. Now, before we wrap things up, I'd like to do a community spotlight. Now, normally this would be probably something someone else in the community has made, but I'm going to take this opportunity to promote a recent project of mine, which was the Traveler's Deck playing cards, which you can see on screen right now. This was an actual deck of playing cards I produced. So I designed the entire deck of 52, plus 2 jokers, and I had them actually produced. I had 6 decks produced, as well as a custom set of poker chips. And I created 2 sets of poker chips. And this was just a personal project, something I felt like doing one weekend. And I ended up sending 2 decks and a set of poker chips to Hello Games. So, it's already made its way to the UK. It's still having trouble being delivered, kind of out of my hands at this point. But as a sort of gift for the 5-year celebration, I thought I'd share that with them. They're not available for sale or anything, but let me know in the comments below if you'd be interested in maybe purchasing them, or I don't know what to do with them at this point. Some people have suggested a Kickstarter. I've sort of hoped that Hello Games could add them to the merch store or something like that. Not for me to profit off of, like I'd give them the designs for free, but just so that more fans could access them at a reasonable price, because they were kind of expensive to produce in small quantities. So I couldn't really offer them myself. But yeah, that's something hopefully we'll hear more on in the near future. So with that, that concludes the first ever episode of the Deep Space Travel Break, a new No Man's Sky themed podcast, talking about whatever's going on at the time. I've been Kanaju, and thank you for watching or listening. Let me know if you'd be interested in more episodes. Let me know if the audio quality sucks, the editing sucks, if the commentary sucks. Believe it or not, I'm happy to take some criticism, some suggestions, and I would love to make it better. So until next time, have a good one.